For many years, Johnny Carson stood as the definitive host of late-night television, bringing joy to countless viewers every night through his charisma, cleverness, and memorable opening monologues. Yet hidden behind the laughter and applause was a facet of Carson that the public never witnessed, a concealed aspect that remained out of sight for over 3 decades. This leads to the question, what truly formed the individual behind the microphone, and what mysteries did he ultimately bring to his grave? The following account investigates the narrative surrounding Johnny Carson's deepest secret and exposes the private life of one of television's most celebrated legends, the child who mastered the art of concealment. Born on October 23, 1925, in Corning, Iowa, a small and tranquil town in the American Midwest, Carson's childhood years were more unstable than they initially appeared. His father was employed by a power company, a position that forced the family to move repeatedly. These frequent relocations meant that young Johnny never stayed in any one place long enough to develop close friendships or feel completely at home. Eventually, the family relocated to Norfolk, Nebraska, where Carson spent the bulk of his youth. Although Norfolk provided greater stability, it remained a quiet and traditional town where life followed a predictable pattern. This atmosphere influenced Carson profoundly. He was raised amid order, regularity, and emotional reserve, with little opportunity for honest expression or meaningful emotional discussions. From a very young age, he learned to suppress his emotions and quietly adjust to whatever circumstances arose. As a boy, Johnny Carson was recognized as shy and withdrawn. He was not the type of child who readily made friends or volunteered answers in class. Rather, he remained on the sidelines, watching others instead of participating. He favored solitary time, frequently immersed in his own ideas or imagination. This reserved demeanor was not simply a character trait. It evolved into a lifestyle. Carson learned to carefully observe people, noticing how they spoke, behaved, and responded. While this ability would later benefit him as an entertainer, it also maintained a barrier between himself and others. He did not reveal his emotions openly and seldom shared his thoughts. Even at a young age, there were obvious indications of emotional restraint. He kept his thoughts and feelings private, constructing a wall between himself and the external world. This habit would accompany him into adulthood and become a defining aspect of his identity. Everything started to shift when Carson reached 12 years old. One day, he discovered a book called The Golden Book of Magic, which instantly seized his attention and ignited a profound interest. Magic provided him with something he had never encountered before, a means to relate to people without revealing his authentic self. He began practicing illusions and soon started performing for relatives and neighbors under the title The Great Carson. For the first time, he could stand before others and amuse them, but this was not equivalent to emotional openness. Instead, it offered him command. He could determine what people witnessed, how they responded, and when the act concluded. This marked the beginning of Carson's dual persona. On one side existed the performer, self-assured, amusing, and captivating. On the other side existed the private person, silent, aloof, and protective. Magic enabled him to form a bond with others while still concealing his genuine emotions. It became his initial disguise, one he would continue to wear in various forms throughout his entire life. At only 17, Carson enlisted in the United States Navy during World War II. He served as an ensign on the USS Pennsylvania in the Pacific Ocean. Though he did not experience direct combat, military life had a significant effect on him, demanding discipline, organization, and the capacity to remain composed under pressure. This experience reinforced traits he had already started to develop. He learned to regulate his emotions even more strictly and to stay calm in tense situations. These abilities would later become part of his public persona, particularly during live television broadcasts. Even in the Navy, Carson continued to perform magic tricks for his fellow sailors. Once again, performance became his method of engaging with others, allowing him to connect without emotional vulnerability, thereby strengthening a pattern that had already established itself. In 1962, Carson received the opportunity that would define his career. He was selected to host The Tonight Show. The program already existed, but it required a host who could retain audience interest night after night. Carson assumed that role and rapidly made it his own, introducing a style that revolutionized late-night television. Each episode started with a monologue where he presented jokes about current events. His timing and delivery made even basic jokes feel effective. He also became known for his guest interviews. He listened attentively, replied quickly, and put guests at ease. At the same time, everything was thoroughly managed. The show seemed relaxed, but was not haphazard. Carson created a sense of controlled spontaneity. It appeared natural, but it was built on preparation and organization. And, as his success increased, that hidden side would start to influence every aspect of his personal life. Johnny Carson's first marriage commenced in 1949, soon after he graduated from college. He wed Jody Merrill Walcott, a woman he met while at the University of Nebraska. Initially, their relationship seemed steady and promising. They established family life and had 3 sons, Christopher, Richard, and Corey. From the outside, it appeared that Carson was building both a career and a home. However, issues began to emerge early on. Carson was intensely focused on his work. As he tried to establish himself in radio and television, he spent long hours away from home. His career became his primary concern, leaving little time or energy for his family. Even when he was physically present, he was often emotionally unavailable. There were also rumors of infidelity during this marriage, actions that increased tension and eroded trust. Over time, the combination of emotional absence, extended work hours, and unfaithfulness wore down the relationship. After years of conflict, the marriage concluded in 1963. It was evident that Carson struggled to manage personal relationships alongside his rising career. Only months after his first divorce, Carson married Joan Copeland, a model and television figure. Together, they seemed like a glamorous couple, particularly as Carson's fame continued to grow. On the surface, everything appeared polished and triumphant. Behind closed doors, however, the truth was quite different. Joan later discussed the challenges in their marriage, describing Carson as verbally harsh and emotionally challenging. She claimed he could be mean with his words, especially during disputes. His sharp sense of humor, which entertained people on television, frequently turned into biting sarcasm in private. Alcohol contributed to worsening the situation. Carson was known to drink, and when he did, his behavior could become more erratic. Conflicts grew more intense, and emotional distance continued to widen. Rather than resolving problems, Carson often avoided significant conversations. During this period, his reputation for having a sharp and occasionally hurtful personality started to spread among those close to him. The marriage lasted nearly 10 years, but ultimately ended in 1972, marked by the same problems that had affected his first relationship. Carson's third marriage, to Joanna Holland, lasted longer than the previous 2. At 13 years, it gave the impression of stability. From the outside, it seemed like Carson might have finally discovered a more balanced partnership. However, the same patterns continued underneath the surface. Carson stayed emotionally detached. He avoided serious discussions and struggled to express his feelings. Even during peaceful times, a sense of distance remained between him and his wife. Friends and those close to the couple said that Carson often retreated when matters became too personal or emotional. Instead of confronting issues directly, he would shut down or change the topic, making it hard to forge a deeper bond. In 1983, Joanna filed for divorce without notice. Carson was reportedly taken aback, but he did not contest the decision. He accepted it and moved on quietly. This response mirrored his typical approach to conflict: avoidance instead of involvement. Carson's fourth and final marriage was to Alexis Moss in 1987. By this time, he was older and approaching the final phase of his career. This relationship was considerably more private than the others. Alexis remained out of the public eye, and the couple lived a quieter existence together. With less work-related pressure, Carson seemed to enjoy a more tranquil lifestyle. There were fewer public disagreements, and the relationship appeared more serene. Nevertheless, even in this marriage, Carson did not fundamentally change. He remained emotionally reserved and continued to keep his inner world to himself. This relationship was characterized not by emotional closeness, but by stability and privacy. It functioned partly because it did not require the type of openness that Carson found difficult to provide. And while his marriages clearly demonstrated this pattern, his role as a father would reveal an even deeper dimension of the same struggle. Johnny Carson's difficulties with emotional connection were not confined to his marriages. They were also apparent in his role as a parent. He had 3 sons from his first marriage: Christopher, Rick, and Corey. From the outside, it may have looked like he had a complete family, but the reality was more complex. Carson's career consumed most of his time. As he worked to build and sustain his television success, he was often absent from home. Long hours, constant preparation, and the demands of hosting a nightly show left little room for family life, meaning he was physically missing for large portions of his sons' childhoods. Even when he was present, a gap remained. Carson struggled to show emotions and did not naturally participate in deep or significant conversations. He found it hard to discuss personal matters or offer emotional support. Instead of helping his sons navigate difficulties or connecting with them on a personal level, he frequently stayed quiet and reserved. This created a divide between him and his children. They knew him as a famous personality, but not always as an emotionally accessible father. Over time, that distance became part of their relationship, not due to a single event, but a pattern that persisted for years. Among his 3 sons, Rick Carson faced the greatest challenges. His life was characterized by battles with mental health and substance use. These problems generated tension and added strain to an already distant relationship with his father. Rick reportedly felt abandoned. Like many children in comparable situations, he may have desired more attention, support, and understanding from his father. But Carson, who had always struggled with emotional expression, did not know how to respond in the way Rick needed. There were opportunities over the years for the two to rebuild their bond, but those moments were frequently missed. Communication stayed limited, and emotional obstacles remained in place. Instead of growing closer, the distance between them continued. This was not because Carson lacked caring, but because he lacked the ability to demonstrate it. His lifelong habit of internalizing emotions made it difficult for him to address his son's struggles in a direct and supportive manner. In 1991, everything altered abruptly. Rick Carson died in a car accident at age 39. He had been driving along a steep road when his vehicle went off a cliff. The news arrived unexpectedly and was a devastating shock to Carson. This was more than just a loss. It was the conclusion of any possibility to mend the relationship with his son. All the unspoken and unresolved matters were now permanent. There would be no future discussions, no chance to reconnect, and no way to set things right. The suddenness of the tragedy made it even harder to cope, compelling Carson to confront the reality of what had been lost, not only in that moment, but across many years. After Rick's death, Carson was profoundly affected. Those close to him said he was consumed by regret. He reflected on the distance between them and the missed opportunities. But even in grief, Carson remained faithful to his lifelong pattern. He kept everything inside. He did not speak publicly about his son's death. He did not disclose his feelings in interviews or open up to others in a visible manner. Even privately, he struggled to articulate what he was experiencing. Instead of discussing his pain, he bore it in silence. And as this silence intensified, it would soon connect to another aspect of Carson that few truly understood. When Johnny Carson retired in 1992, it signaled the end of an era in television. After hosting The Tonight Show for 30 years, he had become one of the most recognized and trusted figures in entertainment. Millions of people had incorporated him into their nightly routine. So, when he announced he was stepping down, it was a significant moment. But what followed was even more surprising. Carson did not merely retire from the show. He withdrew from public life almost entirely. Many celebrities continued to give interviews, attend events, or make occasional comebacks after retiring. Carson chose a very different route. He made a clear decision to leave everything behind. His final episode aired in May 1992 and was watched by tens of millions of viewers, demonstrating just how much he meant to his audience. That night, he said goodbye in the same manner he had always conducted himself: calm, controlled, and composed. There were no dramatic moments or emotional speeches. He thanked his audience and his team, then quietly stepped away. For many, it felt like the conclusion of something much larger than just a television program. People expected that over time he might return for a special appearance or at least remain somewhat visible. But Carson had already made up his mind. After retiring, he refused every request to return to the spotlight. Television networks invited him to appear in interviews, specials, and tribute shows. He turned them all down. Even when major events were organized to celebrate his career, he chose not to participate. This was unusual for someone of his stature. Fans wanted to hear from him again, to see him reflect on his career or share stories from his years on television. But Carson showed no interest in doing so. He did not give interviews, did not appear on talk shows, and did not record messages for public broadcasts. After leaving television, Carson settled into a quiet life in Malibu, California. His home overlooked the ocean, providing privacy and distance from the busy world he had left behind. He spent his time away from cameras, crowds, and public attention. There were very few sightings of him during these years. Occasionally, people would see him on his boat or during brief outings, but these moments were rare. He did not attend social events or maintain a visible presence in the entertainment world. This lifestyle was not forced upon him. It was something he selected. He had spent decades in front of millions of viewers, and now he desired the opposite: space, silence, and command over his own time. For Carson, this was not just retirement. It was a complete retreat from the life he had once led. Johnny Carson passed away on January 23, 2005, at the age of 79. The cause was complications from emphysema, a lung disease often associated with smoking. Although he had stopped smoking later in life, the long-term effects remained.